to this ILNet sponsored conversation on staff retention. I wanted to just go over a few things about how to participate in today's call, and I just really appreciate that you all hopefully will kind of help me help you, if you will. This is my first time running a Zoom call, and so as we get going, hopefully things will get a little bit easier, but for today, we're just kind of gonna go with the flow. So for today's call, in order to participate, if you move your cursor around on your screen, a toolbar should pop up either on the top or the bottom of your screen. In the left-hand corner of your screen, there'll be a microphone to mute and unmute yourself. And then by pressing the chat bubble, there should be a little chat bubble up there as well. You can type a question in for us from your computer, or you can chat with each other, which is awesome. If you have official questions for the folks that are helping us to lead today's call, you can type it into the little Q&A box with a little file folder on it. And then once we get going here, if you're just using our phone lines or if you're using the phone instead of your computer mic, you can actually unmute and mute with *6. And then this says captions will be provided in the webinar platform, and I apologize, I wasn't able to figure that out for this time, but we do still have those captions available at this link here at StreamText. I mean, you can go ahead and do that. If you don't mind actually typing your questions in the Zoom platform, oh, look, she says click their name and the participants. You know what, Linda, I didn't see that option when I did it, but I will definitely get on top of it for next time. If you're having any trouble at all with today's call, you can always email me, and that's mary.olson@mso.umt.edu. And then hopefully I'll be able to get you squared away at that point. Oops, excuse me. All right, so we're gonna go to the next slide. And again, if you guys are following along from home just on the phone, we actually do have this PowerPoint uploaded on the April website, and that's www.april-rural.org. And you can download it and follow along with us there if you're on the phone. So again, this is an ILNet sponsored call, and the ILNet is a national training and technical assistance project for Centers for Independent Living and statewide independent living councils. The ILNet is operated by ILRU in partnership with Nickel, April, and Utah State. And so today we're really excited for staff retention, investing in your staff for a stronger tomorrow. And today we're lucky to have Brooke and Scott with us, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about them. Today's discussion, we're going to really hope to cover finding and hiring staff, training and support, building a culture, and clarified expectations. But as with all conversations, we really also want to cover topics that are important to you and hear from you all in the field as to what you guys are doing. So we kind of like to start with a few guiding discussion questions just for you guys to think about while we're going through content so that you can really jump in and participate in the conversation. Think about, how do you recruit staff? How do you decide what you're looking for when you're hiring? How do you create a culture where people want to stay? How does staff bring forth ideas for organizational growth? How does staff know if they're doing a good job? And for those of you, especially since we have such a huge group of folks who've been in IL for a little while, why do you stay at your job? So first, I'd love to introduce to you Brooke. Brooke is a training and technical assistance specialist at ILRU. Previously, she worked in recruiting and managed a staff of 40 in a high turnover industry, improved retention through ambassador and mentorship program and staff appreciation events and awards. Franchise location awarded for highest total revenue growth and highest employee growth for locations up to $750,000 in 2017. She also played a notable role in launching a young professional group and junior board for a nonprofit. Oh, thanks, Brooke. And I also want to introduce to you Scott. So Scott is the executive director at Independence Inc., a resource center for independent living in Minot, North Dakota. Some of you might not know this, but I telecommute to our Arkansas office, and I live in Montana, and we always say, why not, Minot? Independence Inc. has a staff of 9 people and a budget of around $670,000. So Scott is rural. Over 20 years of experience as a supervisor and manager. And over the last 8 years, Independence Inc. has went from 60 to 70% annual turnover to less than 10%. During that same time, we've increased our consumer caseload by 600%, increased our community profile drastically, and positioned ourselves as a leader of local community and systems advocacy. Oh, we are so lucky to have both Brooke and Scott with us today. And I guess without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to them.
All right, thanks, Mary. We're super excited again to talk about staff retention. And as Mary said, this is a conversation, so if at any point you do have questions, please use the chat. But to start it off, I really wanted to share this quote that I really like, and it says, "You can't make up for in training what you messed up in hiring." That was a quote that I would commonly hear, and I think that this is so important when you're talking about staff retention, because really hiring and the hiring process is so essential to making sure that you're getting the right individuals in your organization. Okay, so next slide, please, Mary. All right, so when we're talking about recruiting and hiring, really the first step is to look at how you're sourcing candidates. So of course you can source them internally, so you can have internal candidates. And so this is really great because those candidates, they're familiar with your organization already, and they're aware of your organizational culture. But you can also have outbound candidates. And so a lot of the times this will come when you post a job listing. So you might post it on LinkedIn or Indeed or on April or ILRU's website. Or you can also recruit candidates or find candidates by going out in the community as well. And then another aspect that's commonly used are referrals. So you might know someone who works for you, who knows someone who's looking for a job, or they're potentially looking to get involved with independent living. I will caution kind of about the referral program. You don't really want to rely on that too much, or you really want to make sure that you have safeguards up in place just so that you're not hiring someone's friend and you're kind of not doing your due diligence on that person, okay? And then also for screening. So I think screening is really important because you have these applicants coming in. You want to make sure that they meet your requirements. Maybe you're looking for a year or 2 of experience in, I don't know, customer relations or something of that sort. But also, before you start screening, you really want to come up with some guidelines for really what you're looking for in the applicants. Just so that way you're making sure that you're really getting the candidate that you would like. One thing that I've done previously in my role in recruiting was I did conduct a lot of phone screens, and I thought that this was really important, especially in the industry that we worked in, because a lot of the people who we hired, they really had to make a good first impression over the phone. So for me, using a phone screen was a good indicator of if they would be able to do that. and also be able to communicate and tell me about themselves. And so really when you're thinking about the recruiting and hiring process and sourcing and screening candidates, you really want to look at it like a funnel, right? You really want to have a good amount of applicants applying for your openings, because if you have two applicants apply, you might not be happy with just those two. So you really want to have a good number of applicants coming in for you to review, so that way you feel like you have options and you're not just limited to two applicants, okay? And then also some other things to consider when you're looking at candidates. It's really easy to just look at those basic requirements and kind of check people off, or, just eliminate them, but really consider some transferable skills. Maybe they're not familiar with independent living, but maybe they've worked with other nonprofits, and those could be skills that could transfer over to the role that you're looking to hire for. Also look at community involvement. I mean, what we do in independent living, we're out in the community. So maybe they do a lot of volunteering, or they're just super involved in their community, and that's something that is really important. And then also, of course, you want to look at leadership experience. You want people to come in who want to grow. You want for them to have some form of leadership experience. And I think that this is super important, especially if you're hiring for a managing role, okay? And then also one thing, and I'm sure everyone is doing this, but when you're reviewing applications and we're talking about staff retention, we want to retain people. We want for them to stay with us and hang out for quite some time. So really think about and look at how long they're staying at their previous positions. If they were there for only 6 months, or if they have like 2 or 3 job positions where they were there for just 6 months, really consider how long you think that they'll stay with your organization. Okay. Mary, next slide, please. Thank you. And so when we're talking about the interviewing process, you've screened your applicants, or you've reviewed their resumes. I just wanted to give 2 examples of interview questions. So the first question says, what do you think is the most important aspect of management and why? And then the second question says, do you like working with people? So I want you to think about those questions. And now I want you to compare them to the second set of questions, which say, tell me about a time when you handled a difficult situation. Describe a time when you worked as a team to accomplish a goal. So kind of what are some of the differences that you see here? Really, the first set is asking more of a direct question. The question is kind of more closed-ended, versus the second set, it's kind of behavioral. And so when you have these behavioral questions, it's going to be kind of an indicator of how individuals are going to handle difficult situations, how they work in teams. And so really kind of listen to what people tell you in those situations. If you ask about, tell me about a time when you worked as a team, and they said, I worked with a team and I missed half the meetings, and I kind of just did my fair share kind of towards the end. That's kind of going to tell you a lot about them. And it might not be someone that you want with your organization because it won't align with your organizational culture. But versus someone who says, I really enjoy working with teams. I like getting to know people. I really I think it's really important to get to know the strengths and kind of weaknesses of everyone on the team so that we can work cohesively together. Next slide, please. And sorry, Scott, I don't know do you want to add something in there?
No, you're doing wonderful.
Okay, all right. And I think I'm going to pass this off to you, Scott, too.
Okay. So just to talk a little bit about some of the best practices in hiring, and one of the things that we really talk about is kind of your culture around hiring and how do you go about making decisions. And Brooke used that quote earlier about, don't think that you can fix and training for mistakes you made in hiring. And I think that a lot of what you want to do is to really be careful and take your time and do your due diligence in the process of hiring. And it can become frustrating because we all understand, we've all been short staffed. We've all had those situations where there's work not being done because employees aren't there, or there's contracts that aren't able to be met because there's nobody to fill that need, or there's people that we're trying to serve that we can't serve right away or in the way that we want to because there's no consumers involved or there's no staff to serve that. But at the same time, it is oftentimes it's better to leave a spot open than it is to hire the wrong person. And one of the hardest things that we need to do is to just become comfortable with that. And it's hard because we're in hiring positions. It's actually ironic. I've had it on my performance review a few times about, board members who are concerned about turnover, about open spots. And one of the things I've really tried to talk to them about is that not all turnover is bad turnover. And that if you don't find the right person, if you don't hire the right person, that can be really difficult. One of the lessons that I learned here in Minot is shortly after I got into this job, we had a flood. So about a quarter of our city was underwater, and we were right in the middle of an oil boom. So we had both a shortage of housing because of an oil boom and a shortage of housing because of a flood. And so there wasn't a whole lot of employees out there. So there was periods of time when we would do what Brooke talked about. We would have 2 applicants. And if they weren't the right 2 applicants, one of the hardest things that we had to learn was that it was all right to let that go. So don't allow your desire to fill a seat override your best judgment. I often say, if you have those little things during the interview process or during your hiring process, those little hairs that stand up on the back of your neck, and just say, this person's not going to fit into our culture. This person is not going to make it in this environment that we're trying to create, in this culture that we're trying to create. Don't hire them. And because the wrong employee is often more damaging than no employee at all. And we have all been there. I'm sure you've had that one person who comes in and just kind of drops a bomb of negativity throughout everything that you are trying to accomplish. And it can be really, really hard, maybe more than a bomb, a stink bomb. And once that stink gets throughout your entire business, it's really hard to wash that stink off. And it can take an entire, years at times to get rid of that. And so just really take your time in the process of hiring and be unapologetic about that, about we are going to find the right person. So go ahead, Mary.
Next slide.
Yes, please. Sorry, I didn't say that.
So we did want to talk a little bit about training as well. So you've hired your ideal candidate. They're doing great. They're coming in for orientation, but really just understand that training is really beyond orientation. It should be an ongoing process. We're always learning, and really a lot of the times when you do have a new staff member come in, a lot of the times they'll have goals, and those goals will be to grow professionally, and a lot of the times they really do involve training. So be sure that you're having some form of like a training plan in mind. I just want to draw attention and point out that ilru.org has some great resources. We do have the self-paced courses, online courses, on-location trainings, and webinars. And then some other ideas that we heard when it comes to kind of organizations really being creative in regards to training were mentorship. So this is really great if you have a veteran staff member who they just have a wealth of knowledge, and it's a really good opportunity to partner them with a newer staff member. And then I think also site visits to other CILs. One thing that we're seeing is that, we talk a lot about peer mentoring, right? But really that can extend between centers. So a lot of the times centers are learning a lot more about services and kind of innovative things that they can be doing from other CILs. So a site visit might be a good way to just really take a different approach and see how other centers are doing things. And as I mentioned, creating a training plan. And then also staff competitions. So I heard about one center who they really wanted to push training among their staff members. So every month they have like a $15 Starbucks card drawing. So if you complete your trainings, your name goes into that drawing and you can win the gift card. I mean, how easy is that? And then I know Scott really, at his center, he does monthly all staff meetings. Scott, is it something you want to tell them a little bit more about?
Yeah, and we'll talk about that here throughout it, but you're absolutely right. We very much prioritize training. I believe that there's a direct correlation between not only how much training do you provide and how effective are you, but how much training you provide and how much people understand and see the value that you put into them as an organization, because you are consistently investing in them. And so that might not always necessarily be for the job they currently have. And it takes a certain amount of security as a manager to get comfortable with that. But sometimes you're providing people with training for their next job. But when they see you investing in them, they human beings have that ability or that desire sometimes to appreciate that. And I do believe there's actually, I had an experience many years ago where, and a lot of us have been there, you have a tight budget and you're trying to figure out what can you cut. And oftentimes one of the first things you want to cut is your training and travel budget, because it feels like maybe it's a little bit extra. However, we eliminated it at the center I was working at the time, and we had massive turnover in the next year. And I've always felt there was a little bit of correlation there, because when that was reduced, people stopped seeing the value in what you were or how you valued them. And you're absolutely right, Brooke. We do have monthly staff meetings, and there's, with every one of those, is at least one, if not two, different type of trainings that we bring into it. So,
nice.
Yeah. So you can go on to the next slide, Mary. So, and within those staff meetings, one of the things that we really try hard to do is to establish a disability rights friendly culture within our office, and to really do that. So there's I believe it's called the Wordle here on the side, that has a whole bunch of words like pride and inclusion and resources and culture and identity and all those different kind of disability rights words that we all know and love. And so within that, again, going back to these staff meetings, is we constantly review disability history and work to define disability culture. There was a time back here when one of my staff was working with Mary and Sierra from April a little bit, and she forgot what ADAPT was. So instantly at the next staff meeting, we had a good hour-long presentation on the history of ADAPT and the history of that movement and what all the good things that they've done, because I want each and every one of our staff within our organization to really understand and have that deep comprehension of how we got to who we are. And we really, really get into that, because I've even heard people who have left our organization in X interviews that say, look, this isn't the right job for me anymore, but the thing I loved about this organization was your commitment to the culture and your commitment to this movement and things like that. One of the other things that we've been really working on encouraging lately is to encourage public displays of disability pride. And what I mean by that is that obviously over half of our board and staff and management staff are persons with disabilities. But one of the things that I've learned, and I've actually been stealing this a little bit because I've been doing some work with people that are in recovery and from addiction, is the just extreme importance of people with disabilities being able to talk about what that disability means to them and how they can do that, and being comfortable with saying, here's my disability, here's what it means, and here's my story, and to be very proud of that. And the correlation that we're seeing with that is that when people feel like their disability is seen as an asset to their employment, they again feel like it's a much more comfortable, long-term, rewarding place that they want to work. Next is we work to radically accommodate disabilities. And what I mean by that is that to be very, very intentional with how we can accommodate. So when I talk about accommodations, there's good HR practices that we talk to other employees about, like, hey, make sure that when somebody comes in, they have a form that if they need to request a reasonable accommodation, that they can fill it out. And maybe during your performance reviews, you do that. You offer that again. But when I talk about radically accommodating it, is to have constant conversations between management staff and between supervisors and staff about, how are you doing with these accommodations? Are we accommodating you in the right ways? Is there other ways that we can accommodate you? and really diving into what is a disability related issue that we can accommodate and what is a performance issue or an essential function of your job that may or may not be accommodated. And in doing that, you're allowed to set high expectations. And I'm unapologetic, and we set high expectations. I expect a lot out of the people that come to work here. And I believe that, you know, when we radically accommodate disabilities, even people with some of the most severe disabilities or with the disabilities that most affect their workplace, can find a way to become successful. And I often say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being that perfect employee, and maybe they need an accommodation on 3 of those things, but if you can find a way to either to move things around or change things or figure out some way to accommodate that, it again becomes that disability rights friendly culture that makes it a place that people want to work, and they think, how could I ever want to go work anywhere else? So next slide, Mary. And so now we have a meme, and I'm trying my best to use as many memes as possible in these as I do it. So this is on organizational culture, and there's a meme from the Office Space saying, if you could certify to me that we have a culture of compliance, that would be great. And I think that's one of those little kind of funny things, because culture within your organization can be a little bit hard to define. And if you have 100 employees, you'll maybe get 100 different definitions of what that corporate culture is or whatever. However, I do kind of think that you know what your culture is of an organization. And I just recently heard something that I found to be fascinating. And as soon as I heard it, I'm like, I'm going to be repeating this for a long time. But it was that within an organization, it takes 7 years to establish a culture. And that's a pretty long time. I mean, that's, and then I thought about myself, and I realized I'd been at my job about 8 years at that point, and that it was really within the last year that we had really established a culture. So a lot of those 7 years were very rough. We did not have low turnover during those 7 years. We did not have a great workforce that really kind of understood our roles and that understood the importance of the disability rights stuff and understood the history of independent living and all of those things. And it was tough. There was a lot of hard times to go through as we were establishing that organizational culture. And to be blunt, some of the people that started at the beginning are no longer here because it wasn't the right place for them. This wasn't the culture that we were trying to set up, wasn't the culture that was right for them, and that's okay. Just as it's wrong for us to expect, it's wrong for us to expect somebody to be in our workforce if they aren't interested in being part of our culture. So next slide, Mary.
Scott, I have a question
go
for
ahead.
you real quick. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about how you would describe your organizational culture?
Yeah, I see. And again, that's one of those lovely things, Brooke, that as you say it, it's like, ooh, this is tough. But we absolutely, we have a very, cross-disability culture within our organization. We try really hard to really live the fact that we don't want to establish a hierarchy amongst different people with disabilities. We have a strong work-friendly culture that we're not going to sit back. And one of the cultures I explained is, my joke is, don't complain about being busy at work is a little bit like complaining about being wet in the shower. You're kind of supposed to be busy. So rather than talking and complaining about how busy we are, our culture is, hey, I'm overwhelmed right now. What can I do to fix this? How can I take personal responsibility and fix this? We're going to talk about communication here in a little bit too. Kind of very radical communication and a lot of self-responsibility within that. Communication is a big part of our culture. And then the last thing I'll kind of summarize, which is one of my favorite sayings, is we make full speed mistakes. I talk about, if we're going to make mistakes, let's make mistakes because they were mistakes of effort, that we ran into a wall at full speed. And what I mean by that is that I don't want to punish people who go out and try something and it doesn't work. You'll get in trouble if you don't try something and it doesn't work, if you're not doing anything. I don't like mistakes of laziness, but I appreciate and I support mistakes of effort. If somebody goes out and tries something with somebody and it doesn't work, we'll be like, all right, let's learn. That was a learner moment. Nobody was hurt. What did we learn from it? So we very, very much build a culture around that. So I hope that answers your question, Brooke.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. So a little bit about why do people stay, and I found this on thebalancemb.com. And I actually found this as we were preparing this, and I had established a lot of this list already. So one of the cultural things also that I like to talk about, and something that I established early on, was sometimes we spend so much time asking ourselves, why did people leave organizations? and you find out things like that person left because they didn't like the work, or they left because they could make more money somewhere else, or they left because, whatever reason. And to me, sometimes I felt like that was asking the wrong question. And what I wanted to ask is, why do people stay? Because when you begin to do that, you can find out what works and figure out how to repeat that. So if you have 2 or 3% or 10% of your employees who have been there for a long time, have conversations with them. Why have you stayed in this organization? If you have somebody like Burke talked about earlier that had been job hopping beforehand and you hired them, and now they've been here for 3-4 years, find out why. Find out what is it about this organization that made them decide. And again, that helps to establish what your internal culture is. And so one of the most important things here is leadership and planning. And people like and they respect that the organization has a plan, that they know where they're going. And when I talk about leadership here, I'm not talking about hardcore management. I'm not talking about if I'm 5 minutes late, I get, written up every time or things like that. I'm talking about leadership like it's a kind of organization where there's people of integrity in charge, and the type of organization where there's here's our vision, and we want to get your input, and we want to have a vision, and we have a goal, and we want to work towards that. So it's that kind of stuff. And there are organizations out there that don't have that. When I started at my current job, the organization did not have that. There was no plan. They had a work plan that had no vision behind it. It was just, we're going to do this many classes, and we're going to do this many IL services. But it didn't say why. There was no purpose. There was no meat. There was no meaning behind any of that. So leadership and planning is very important. I mentioned corporate culture and communications quite a bit. And again, I'm going to talk about communications in one of the next slides here a little bit more. But people stay in an organization when they feel like they're appreciated, when they feel like that the culture of the organization is a place that they can be part of. We don't talk a lot about pay and benefits, and pay and benefits within the nonprofit world and within the independent living world can be a little bit sticky. However, that being said, we shouldn't accept low expectations or low pay forever. There may be, within the little city of Minot here that I live in, my competition for employees is there's a college where employees can go to and get way better health insurance and get like 4 hours of rest and relaxation time every month, or every week, I mean. So they're really only working 36 hours a week. And and they get paid more money. So that's part of my competition. People can go work at the state of North Dakota where they can make more money. But there's other things beyond that with pay. I can work on consistently trying to pay people better and to reward people who are doing a good job. I work really hard to provide the best quality health insurance that I can for my employees, because unfortunately, sometimes people with disabilities do have higher healthcare needs. And so if I can provide the best quality health insurance package that I can purchase to my employees, I feel like they're going to be at work longer, they're not going to be sick as much, and they're going to have less debt kind of ruining their life, as oftentimes a medical debt does. So I try my best to offer up an entire pay and benefits package that works well for people. We talked a lot about training and development and resources and just investing in people, and looking at it as that, not only investing in people individually, but investing in your organization. When you talked about the planning, so here's our goal, here's what we want to shoot for. And then you look around and say, do we have the capacity to do that? And how do we work on preparing people and increasing the knowledge around the table to get that a little bit better? Engagement is extraordinarily important as well. People need to know and they need to understand that their input is valued, and that we are intentional with creating opportunities to listen to folks. So for example, when we talked about that planning and those goals, when we set our annual work plan every year, every single part of that starts with direct service staff giving me input on what they think they want to do. And it starts with teams of people talking about their independent living based goals or their organizational based goals, and they're fed up to me. Now, not every one of those are necessarily approved or end up on our final work plan or what the board ends up approving, but every single thing starts that way. And so when we allow that, and then we flip it back around and we say, now every one of us are responsible for being engaged in achieving this organizational goal. It's not me as the executive director or the board of directors or our management staff's goals. This is your goal. So how are you going to figure out how to do that? And some of our most engaged employees are the ones that have their work plan and their goals integrated right into their personal employment goals and into their daily life and everything else. And they begin to be to feel as if they're part of something maybe a little bit bigger. Role satisfaction is important, and flexibility comes into play so much here that just because somebody was hired for one job doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're going to do forever. And just because somebody is really good at something today doesn't mean that's going to be what they're going to want to do forever. And to allow flexibility as programming changes, as work plans change, as directions for the organizations change, to allow people to grow into whatever role they want to be involved in, and not to allow them to feel that this is just as good as it gets. One of my longest term employees, who is also my oldest employee, has changed roles within the last few years about 3 times. And so she's still has the same job title, but what she's actually doing on a day-to-day basis has changed pretty significantly, because she's been able to change the way the organization needed her to change, and she's been able to change the way that she felt can help make her a happier employee. And finally, work environment. And work environment could be one of the most important things. And this is kind of that holistic approach to what is the place like. Is it a welcoming environment to come in? Is it a warm place? Do you have some plants around, maybe a water cooler, some coffee? Those physical things can make a difference. Is there a proper temperature? By the way, there's probably nothing going to make a company feud more than the temperature of the office. So can you deal with that? I literally had to put out a policy one time on temperature of the office because people were fighting over it. And once we established it and we set the expectation, people were a little bit better off. But also, is there a chance to BS with your coworkers a little bit? Is there a chance to have some humor in your workday? Is there a chance I talk about to have an inside voice? Sometimes our jobs are frustrating. And is there a safe place where you can walk into somebody's office and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so frustrated right now. I can't believe this happened. I can't believe that happened. Is there a safe place to allow that to be expressed without it, without destroying somebody because maybe they slip up and say something that you don't want said outside? I call it use your inside voice. You need to come into my office and vent and maybe say something that's a little bit inappropriate. It's okay, because this is safe. But once you leave my office, you need to go back to being a professional again. You need to treat everybody with respect. And so being able to do that. And so, really kind of creating that work environment that allows for as much individuality and as much safety and as much comfort as possible. Brooke, I just talked a whole bunch. Do you have something to add to this?
I think we want to hear if what the incentives are with everyone's organization. So if you could raise your hand and that way we can open your mic. We want to hear that feedback about, what great innovative incentives have been implemented at your CIL.
Thank you, Brooke. So yeah, folks, I apologize. Again, I'm figuring out my system, and I just logged into another computer and realized I don't know that you have mute and unmute. So if you can click the hand and raise your hand, I can open up your mic, or you're welcome to type it in the chat. But before we move on, just start thinking about what are the incentives at your CIL, or what are some of the reasons why you stay or are satisfied with your work? So I'll go ahead and let you, Brooke, move forward while folks are thinking about that, and we'll jump in as soon as we get some.
Okay. Yeah, I think, Scott, I think you did an excellent job with the information. I don't have anything to add. It was great.
And I will just add on to you talked a little bit about incentives and to throw that out. Little things that you can do oftentimes make a big difference. I may have mentioned this, but maybe having a potluck, or maybe having a barbecue. We have a barbecue grill that was donated to us a few years ago. So, every once in a while we've went out and grilled some meat up on a Friday afternoon, take an hour of your time, or, we have a staff board Christmas party. Just little things like that do tend to go a really long way. We celebrate accomplishments. When I talked about staff meeting earlier, every single staff meeting, we not only celebrate things like anniversaries and birthdays or major accomplishments, like somebody graduated college or they got a new certificate or something like that. Those are important to celebrate. But also life things. Somebody had a baby, or somebody's son is graduating from high school, or somebody got married or divorced or whatever major accomplishment that you want to celebrate, we try our best to celebrate it. And it's so important to just know just that little bit about employees and to recognize it. Or somebody's going through a downtime, or if your office is a little bit stressful, and I'll give you a great example because it happened about 2 hours ago here. Amber, who's our finance director, was like, I feel like the mood's just a little too tight around here right now. And she went to the store and bought some cookies and brought them back and was like, everybody enjoy your cookies. And everybody was like, oh, shucky darny, I'm going to ruin my diet. And then ate those things like the Cookie Monster, going crazy on it because they were absolutely fantastic. So just little things like that can make a huge difference.
Well, and I think too, Scott, I think when you have those weekly staff meetings or however frequently you're meeting, just even like a kudos session, just like at the beginning of the meeting, kind of open with kudos and give your staff an opportunity to just show appreciation for maybe another staff member. It's really those little moments that really make a difference. I think gratitude, even though it seems so simple, we can get caught up in our day-to-day responsibilities and just forget to be thankful to our staff members.
Thank you, Brooke. While folks are thinking about their thoughts here, if you do have the option to mute and unmute from home, please do so and jump on in, or press *6 to unmute your line or raise your hand. And I will add that Brittany added in the chat box, similar to Scott's bill, we have great insurance benefits. Employees also get a paid day off for their birthday and a floating holiday to use as they choose. I'm taking that one to the bank, Brittany. That's great. I stay at my job because of the flexibility to work from the strengths and explore things I am passionate about. Another incentive example is related to training. My CIL paid for me to take an ASL course since I work directly with a deaf coworker. That's a great example, I think, of a staff benefit is that professional development and training. You know, I'll throw my 2 cents in that working at my CIL, that's really how I got my jump start into my career. And that's how I figured out what I was interested in and why I was able to pursue it further. So I agree, Brittany.
And just to kind of add on to that too, the importance of supporting people in their goals. When I was going to college, when I was working at another center, I went back to college like in my mid-30s or whatever, and my boss came to me and said, you know what, if you need, I had kids at home at the time, and he said, if you need a quiet place to come do homework, you can use our office. You can use some of your training budget to help pay for, some paper and things like that in order to help. It was a huge difference because otherwise I was at home, trying to do it with screaming babies in the background and stuff like that. So being able to come in on a Saturday and actually take advantage of some of the spacing and stuff like that was wonderful. Now, did it help me in my job? Absolutely it did. At that time, I was going, my educational background is in business, and I was working on entrepreneurship for people with disabilities. So there was a direct correlation between what I was learning and how I was doing my job. But at the same time, that education helped me get another job at another center, and I left there. So it could have been easy for him to have been jaded and said, nah, I don't want you doing that. But it made me a better employee for the next 3, 4, 5 years while I was there. And he was able to get as much maximum effort out of me. So it didn't steal necessarily from our company. It didn't steal, other than, the lights being on or whatever. And I think I maybe used the copier from time to time, but it wasn't a major expense for the company. But it was a major benefit for me, and it made me appreciate and feel appreciated and valued by the organization. So, if you can do things like that, and I've offered that to staff I've had now, I've said the same thing, come in, use our office space, take advantage of it, because I want you to be happy. So, all right. So one of my favorite one of my favorite shows is The Office, and this is a Michael Scott meme that says, would I rather be feared or loved? Easy. Both. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me. And I heard that the first time. I was like, that's exactly me. No, the reality is that you're not going to always make everybody happy as a supervisor, no matter how good of benefits you roll out. You're going to get people that don't appreciate it or that don't understand it. Or I think it was Brittany earlier that was talking about how offering up really good health benefits is a good incentive. And then you have people that will complain about how expensive it is. Or maybe if you didn't give me such good insurance, you could pay me a higher salary. But the reality is that you got to do what you feel is right and kind of move forward. So you can go on to the next one, Mary.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. And for those of you who are keeping count at home, I think I finally figured out how to give you microphone rights. So if anybody wanted to jump in, feel free to do that while we're changing slides.
So here's one of my favorite things of all time that I created out of complete frustration at a staff meeting one time, many, many moons ago. And a lot of us who have worked in organizations have probably said, you know what this organization really has is a communication problem. And some organizations legitimately do it. And all of us from time to time are imperfect communicators. And as a lot of us know, of course, too, many of us communicate in very different styles, and not just necessarily like I use American Sign Language and I don't, but there's different communication styles because the way I hear things or the way I perceive things in communication are very different. And so one of the first things that I talked about in this triangle at the bottom of it is it says personal responsibility. And to me, so much about communication and effective communication is taking responsibility and kind of owning your own stuff. And so when I talked about kind of what our corporate culture is, this is a big part of it, is that if I don't understand something or if I'm confused, it's on me to try to figure it out or to talk to the right person. And so if I'm in a board meeting or a staff meeting and there's a policy that comes out about, what to do if you're going to be late for work, rather than me, if I didn't understand it or don't remember it, sitting there saying, nobody told me or it didn't make any sense to me, it's my job to go talk to the right person and have a one-on-one face-to-face conversation with that person and be like, explain this to me, talk to me about this, and really own it. If I own my own thing, my own stuff when it comes to communication is extraordinarily important, is to really have that base. That is kind of the foundation of good communication. The next part up is trust. And within trust within an organization and communication is, I'm going to trust that your intentions. I'm going to trust that you're going to do what you need to do. I'm going to trust people to handle things that I don't need to know about. And an example I often use of this is when I talk to staff is that I need you to trust the management of the organization to deal with stuff that I don't want you worrying about. I don't want you worrying about, hardcore budgetary issues. I don't want you worried about how we're going to adjust the budget to pay for the increase in health insurance or how we're going to handle the fact that our lease is over in a few months. You can come and talk to me, but I may not tell you things that I don't want to burden you with, because I want you focusing on what's important. And that doesn't mean that I'm hiding or that I'm, I don't trust you or anything else, but rather that not all decisions are made yet. And that especially comes up end of a grant cycle. What are you going to do? Are you going to eliminate somebody? I'll be honest and say, I just had this happen. I was honest. I said, your grant is coming to an end. I would prefer to keep you on. But if it can't, this is when your job will end, and I will continue to communicate with you. And I didn't want that person coming to me every day and being like, what has changed or whatever, but just really, really paying attention to that trust mechanism. And it gets down to a much more basic basis too, like, hey, if I don't like the way you communicated with me, I'm going to tell you how I prefer to be communicated with. Or if I don't like this, just really owning that. And then on top of that is communication and just being extraordinarily intentional with it and unapologetic about it and communicating in multiple formats. It's not uncommon for us to sit down at a staff meeting and explain something and then follow it up with an email or before we come into the staff meeting to type up what we're going to say and hand it out to everybody else. So they have it in written format and they have it in verbal format, and to really be as open as we can with the communication in order to do it. And I try hard to establish a culture of, we're not offended if we have to explain something to you a second or a third time. I joke a lot of times that it took me 10 years in independent living before I knew the difference between what the Part B and the Part C grant was. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I had that explained to me, and I just couldn't remember. Also, I will be honest with you, as Mary knows very well, I have no ability to understand the differences in time zones, and every time I'm doing with anything time zone wise, it's like major anxiety for me. And so people have had to explain to me many, many times the difference between mountain time and central time and eastern time. And I keep asking, and I'm going to continue to keep asking up until the day that I have clocks on my wall in each time zone so that I can remember it. And so we all have things like that maybe we just don't understand yet, or we don't get. I just had somebody come to me not too long ago, a rather long-term employee, and really wanted to talk to me a little bit about, oh shucks, what was it? It was a core IL issue. Oh, I know what it was. Why is it that we say that information referral, that everybody is a consumer and that everybody is eligible? And they really were struggling with that very simple concept. And rather than shaming them or coming down on them because they didn't understand such a kind of a basic concept, I sat down and had a conversation about, and kind of allowed them to, in a different way, understand the importance of why providing information referral to everybody in the community, not just obviously people with disability, was so valuable. I appreciated the fact that they could come to me and be vulnerable and do that. And if you, and you know, human growth happens through vulnerability. So we really want to allow people to be communicated to in multiple ways. So Brooke, do you have anything to add under the communication topic?
Yeah, yes, I do. I think that the communication triangle, as Scott mentioned, it's important for the whole team. I think it's particularly important for leadership. So kind of the example that Scott gave with his employee and the grant that's ending, I recently heard just kind of like an example of, you know, in one instance, the CEO came in and said, you know what, we've had a great year and we've done so great, and you know, I just really thank everyone. However, we're going to have to do layoffs. And so versus the CEO communicating in a way like, hey, you know, we did well, however, we didn't really meet our goals. So we are going to have to do layoffs. So kind of really, I think that communication, being able to be transparent, I think that is so important for leadership, because you don't want to really confuse people. So if you're going to have to do layoffs, or you're going to have to do something that's not really ideal, you really want to explain why that's happening, because really it's only going to build that trust in the leadership. And I think in the triangle, personal responsibility, I really love the word accountability. I just, I mean, I think that accountability is so great and so important, taking that personal accountability. In my role, I mess up. There's a lot that I don't know and I'm still learning. I actually, yesterday was my work anniversary. I'm celebrating 1 year in IL now. So there's still a lot that I have to learn. So when I do make those mistakes, I really try to own up and take responsibility for them, and really try to learn how I can improve. So I really think, again, communication is just so vital in so many different aspects. And again, when we were talking about the organizational culture, you really want to look at how you're even communicating that, right? So a lot of organizations, they kind of communicate their culture through core values. And they'll say, you know, our core values are transparency, accountability, and they'll list them out, and it'll be like 3 or 4 easy things. So I think that those are good ways to communicate who you are. I think that that's just a really good way to easily convey what your organization is focused on, especially if you're bringing in new staff members. So.
And one thing I'll add to it too, and I'll just say this. First off, congratulations on your 1-year anniversary, Brooke.
Thanks, Scott.
One of the things that we tell people almost right away, we communicate to people right away, and we set as an expectation is, it is going to take you 2 to 3 years before you're a fully competent staff. And it becomes kind of a joke, because people, when they get like 2 years, are like, woohoo, I'm competent today. And then they're like, I don't know anything. But we do that because I want to make sure I establish you do not have to be an expert on day one. And in fact, if you come in and think you're an expert, you're going to hit a wall here pretty soon, because you're going to find out what we're doing is we deal with all types of people and all types of disabilities and all types of social economic backgrounds and all types of bureaucracies. And this is complicated stuff that we're doing. And so it is okay to sit back and be like, I don't know anything. One of my staff came to me one day and she was like, Scott, I don't think I understand disabilities well enough. And so we sat down and talked about that. I'm like, well, what do you mean? And she's like, where can I get training? And so I came to her, she was looking at it from a medical perspective, and I'm teaching her about, kind of the civil rights perspective of disability. So we had an amazing conversation about that. But yeah, just being able to take the time and to give yourself a break. And usually about the time that person hits 3 years and they're competent, I tell them, I've been doing this for almost 19 years and I'm not fully competent yet. There is so much to learn. And going back to when you were talking earlier, Brooke, about what kind of characteristics do you look for in employees, I love to look for people that are naturally curious. I love to look for people that see a problem and try to figure things out, because to me, we are an organization that solves problems, or a movement that solves problems. So I want to hire people that enjoy figuring things out. So, all right. You can
Wonderful.
Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to mention, I see, Florette, that you've unmuted yourself. Did you have something you wanted to add? Pause a moment. If anybody else would like to add anything, we'd love to be able to have a conversation around it. While folks are kind of trying to jump in, while you were talking about having those conversations, Scott, and I want to take a minute to give a shout out to my IL alma mater, if you will, Summit Independent Living Center in Missoula, Montana. And I had a wonderful program manager, Jude Munson, who she actually would sit down with me when I was new, and she's made space in her calendar to visit with me once a week, just to sit down and answer those questions of, was there anything that you encountered you didn't understand? She would sit down and spend hours going over the IL alphabet soup with me, explaining what all the acronyms were, who all the organizations were. And something that she did for me that I think is the reason why I stay, why I've been in IL for 10 plus years now, is that she really made a point to connect me in to the idea that independent living is not just a job. It's a movement and a way of life. She really, explained to me and gave me teachings on what ADAPT was, on what April was, on what NICL was, and what ILRU was, and exposed me to this whole movement rather than it just being a job. And for me, that I think has made all the difference, because it's something that I really believe in. And I think when you believe in something, you really want to stay and you want to do well. Just my 2 cents. Anybody from the audience have anything that they'd like to add? Your 2 cents, if you will. You can chat it in if you're having difficulty with your mic. I'd be happy to voice it, or you can unmute and mute. All right. Hearing none right now,
I think
we'll go ahead and
someone
move
had it.
on. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Brittany, and thanks, Brittany. Brittany was telling me she's having trouble with her microphone, so I will be Brittany's voice. I think one important thing management can do when it comes to communication is meeting staff where they are, just as we do with consumers, not expecting that all staff have the same communication or learning styles. Some will need regularly scheduled meetings with agendas, whereas others will come to talk to you when they do have the questions. Oh, another great point, Brittany. I think in IL, that's what we do best, is meet people where they're at. And if we're going to do it for our consumers, why not for our staff members?
And I think to kind of add on that too, you're absolutely right, Brittany, is being able to understand different people have different needs, which is so duh. Of course, that's the currency that we traffic in on a regular basis. But to realize too, not everybody thinks and sees and communicates exactly the way that I do. And so how can I meet you? And I call this chameleon style leadership, which is I will be the type of leader you need me to be, not the type of leader I want to be. I mean, obviously I'm going to be a type of person I want to be, but if you need somebody that's going to, hit you with a 2x4 right between the eyes every time you get out of line, sometimes I have to do that. If you're the kind of person that's going to need to be coddled and going to need a lot of attaboys, I'm willing to do that too, and everything in between that. It's a matter of being the type of leader that people need in order to achieve their own personal goals, which hopefully also help you to achieve your organization goals.
Scott, a question that I have for you is, how do you identify kind of the type of leader that your staff needs, or is that just a question that you ask?
Yeah, sometimes it is. Like, what do you need from me? Is a conversation. We actually, it's part of our interview questions, is what kind of supervisor do you need? Although you don't always get honest answers because people are trying to interview and they want to give you the textbook answer. It's a combination of feeling it out and trying to see what works with people, but a lot of it is just communication. Like, does this work? I have one employee here who is a former Division I college athlete, and she grew up her entire career of being yelled at by coaches, and I could walk into her office right now and start screaming. That's not my personality, but I could, and start screaming at her about something she did wrong, and she wouldn't lose an ounce of sleep over it, because that's just what she's used to. She likes things very direct, and she's told me that straight up, Scott, you can be direct. You don't like something I do, come and tell me. Don't worry about sugarcoating it with me. And then other people, you get that feeling a little bit more that the part of the culture of the world that I live in, we tend to be a little bit more Scandinavian, which is passive aggressive and don't hurt my feelings at all type things. And so we're aware of that. So it's really kind of a combination of asking people and then paying attention and trying to figure it out. So and sometimes people change too, depending on what the situation is.
Right. It's true. Well, in addition to talking about communication, we wanted to also talk about clarifying expectations. And I think that communication is definitely vital to that. So we included an image here. And, don't let it be like a game of telephone. So in the image, everyone's played telephone, right? Where you start with one word and you pass it down, and by the end of the game, it's a whole different word. So, you really want to, again, be upfront and be very direct about your expectations. And really, from day one, that staff member should know what's expected of them. You should have a one-on-one conversation. You should always also be having those one-on-one check-ins as well. And that really provides an opportunity for, leadership to say, hey, you're doing a great job here, but, let's work on this goal because we're not quite meeting it. And also that gives you that space to just talk to that individual one-on-one, as opposed to, kind of calling them out in front of the group. I also think when we talk about expectations, of course, performance reviews come into play. I know how every organization handles performance reviews is a little different. I'm most familiar with performance reviews around every 6 months, and really that's like that sit down where the staff is being informed of really how they're performing. But again, these don't have to be very formal. You could have those informal kind of sit downs and conversations with your staff, but you just always want to keep that line of communication open. You never want to leave someone guessing how they're doing, like, oh, I think I'm doing what I should be doing, but I guess I'll find out at that performance review. That's not what you want to do. Scott, do you have anything?
I was going to add to that. First off, full disclosure here, I hate performance reviews. They're too formal for me. I like giving performance evaluations. I like talking to people, but you're absolutely right, Brooke. You got to constantly have communication with people. There is the absolute worst thing you can do as a supervisor, as a leader, is save stuff up until somebody's performance review. Nothing should surprise anybody at a performance review, because you have got to deal with stuff way before that. Now, maybe surprise them with how well they've done, or maybe surprise them with, hey, this is what I see for you doing in the future. But if somebody is, like I said, coming in late to work all the time, or somebody is doing terrible on their paperwork, they better know that's coming. And I oftentimes give people a self-evaluation prior to their formal performance review. And I hope and pray that everything on there is exactly the issues that I'm given. And most people evaluate themselves worse than I do. But, you know, and again, with exceptions, I think we probably all had those employees that you've worked with and you've met with one-on-one, and you've been coaching both formal and informal with, and then they do their performance review and they're the perfect employee. And you're like, have you been paying attention? But in general, people do tend to be tougher critics on themselves. But yeah, so just and I think you said this earlier too, Brooke, is some people, it's an open door policy. You know, come in and talk to me whenever you want. I'm actually surprised. I've been on the phone here for, you know, a little over an hour, or on this webinar for a little over an hour, and nobody's walked into my office randomly and started asking me a question. It's been a little bit of peace, but that's okay. That's the culture I create. But also, some people, you have to be like, you know, Leah, I am going to meet with you on Tuesday at 2:00, and we're going to go through a few things. And because if I don't schedule time with her, she's not coming in. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to your point about really knowing your staff and how to communicate with them. Kind of everyone's needs are different. I know that even there's some individuals that I've worked with where they really prefer that even if we have a conversation in person, that everything be followed up with an email. And I totally get it. So really just kind of knowing expectations and really doing your best to meet them. And I think it goes really both ways. It's important for leadership to, again, clarify expectations, but it's also important for the staff to also communicate kind of what their expectations are of leadership too.
Great. And I don't want to get into a lot of like human resource policy type stuff here, but there's nothing wrong too with being able to keep emails or keep, you know, logs or whatever of what communication you do have with employees, because sometimes you're like, I have talked to this employee about this same issue 15 different times. Am I getting to that point where it's just not the right job for them anymore? You know, am I seeing growth? Am I seeing, and being able to say that to somebody, even like, we've talked about this a lot. And I have from time to time had people that have kind of came back to me, and you know, pretty soon you find out they're looking for another job because it's just not the right fit. And again, there's no harm in that. Independent living is not for everybody. And even, who knows, it might not be right for everybody on this call forever. There's no harm in that. And just to accept that we just want to be the best employees and the best employers that we can right now. So.
Right. And to go along with that point, Scott, I know that some organizations, they do more of a formal performance improvement plan. So if there's kind of a reoccurring issue, it is a sit down between the manager and the staff member. And again, like Scott was saying, I know that it seems kind of scary because it's like it's formal, but sometimes there's a need for that. To really document kind of those kind of reoccurring issues, and to say, hey, we've come up with a plan, but you know, it's not working.
Yep. And yeah, I have been involved in organizations, big organizations, that had those very, very formal kind of, you know, progressive discipline plans or whatever, where it's like the first time you get a verbal warning, the second time is a written warning, the second time is a second written warning, the third time is a suspension, and the fourth time is termination. And, you know, that can be a lot of work, and somebody's made a major mistake 5 times by then. But that can work for some people. Some people are like, they didn't get the verbal warning, but when you hand them that piece of paper, then they get it, you know? And so, yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Next, yeah.
So
leave another little moment here. Did anybody have thoughts that they wanted to add? You can, all the different ways, you can chat or unmute or raise your hand. Everybody is just soaking it in, I think, Brooke.
Oh,
and
man.
Scott.
Mary, I'm curious, outside of, if there's questions, I think that would be great, but I'm curious if organizations or sales are using kind of those more formal performance reviews or kind of like the informal check-ins, or are they doing performance improvement plans? Kind of what's going on? That's what I want to know.
and while you guys are all
All
getting
right.
ready or typing in or whatever, I'll just say too, one thing we've done along that lines is we actually have somebody who has in her job description that she's a mentor for the other staff. And she's one of our longer term employees who's been in the human services field for a long time, and she actually mentors people. She's not a supervisor. She's somebody that doesn't have a formal relationship that people can sit down with and ask questions to. So we really do appreciate that. So
That is a great idea,
awesome.
mentoring staff. So for folks in the audience, how do you do performance evals in your centers? I see some names I recognize, and I might call some out. I'm wondering, I don't know, Brandon? I know, Brandon, I've visited with you before, and I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on what you guys do at your cell.
Can you hear me?
yeah.
I can.
Yes.
Okay, so this is Brandon Brown from Empower Tennessee in Nashville. We do performance evaluations every year on all of our staff, and it's usually right after our fiscal year turn, which is in July. And so we take time and we have a standardized form that everyone is aware of, so they know what they're being evaluated on. They have an opportunity to self-evaluate, so they provide their top strengths. They provide a couple of areas where they see they need improvement. They ask for things that they may need from their supervisor, and any accomplishments that we may or may not be aware of, just so we'll have that as a matter of record. And so there's a process. But beyond that, there's ongoing supervision, if you would, for staff. So our programs director meets with the IL staff in some way, shape, or form at least once a week. And we're a small staff. I mean, we only have 4 IL specialists on staff, but I mean, he talks with them at least once a week, either face to face or over the phone or Skype or in our staff meetings or whatever. So it's not like the annual evaluation is the only time in which you get feedback about what's going on, but it's also an ongoing process. And so, like Scott said, when you get to the annual eval, there are no surprises. We actually had someone who, and our rating scale, goes from for our annual evaluation goes from unacceptable all the way out to outstanding. Gratefully so, we don't have anyone who's rated as unacceptable, but we did have someone who rated as needs improvement, and she knew she was going to get that rating when she got into the meeting, because she knew there were some places where she was really falling behind. And so that was not a surprise for her, and I just firmly believe that that's part of our culture, is in transparency, communication, and making sure that you do receive that level of communication in the way you need to be communicated to. So I've been really enjoying a lot of what I've heard from Brooke and Scott, because it's validated some of the things that we're doing here in Nashville, but it also has given me some ideas about some things that we could do differently as well.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you. Great. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to share, either about performance evals or how staff know they're doing a good job?
I think Brittany chatted in.
Wonderful. Brittany says, we do annual performance reviews in line with the staff person's anniversary. The form includes feedback on their job duties directly from the job description, grant goals and where they stand, and feedback on what we call personal attributes. Things like communication, follow through, teamwork, etc. As is mentioned, there should be no surprise feedback. Supervisors should be giving feedback and addressing issues as things happen. Thanks, Brittany.
Yeah. And I think part of just being honest too is that as a supervisor to admit and be vulnerable if you don't know the answer, because that does happen from time to time. Like, we need to work this out. I don't know what's going to happen right now. But also, you know, just again, being honest, like, this sucks. I'm sorry. This isn't a good situation. I'm here for you if you want to come talk to me or whatever, but it's an unfortunate situation. And share bad news bluntly sometimes. You know, don't try to sugarcoat it too much. Don't try to, you know, make it too sweet, but just be like, this sucks. I'm going to tell you something right now that isn't going to be good. But it's so much better to deal with it and get it out there than it is to pretend or to avoid it or to hide it. One other thing I wanted to add, and again, more questions are definitely welcome, but one thing, when we talked about communicating intentionally, we actually established, and I know this isn't going to work in everybody's place, but some of you really rural people or maybe people with small staff, we have a 15-minute meeting at 9 o'clock every Wednesday morning called Team Independence. And if you're not in the office, if you're able to, you can call into it. If you know, again, we don't tell you, like, don't, you know, if you have a consumer meeting at that time, that's fine. But if you're available, we'd love to have you there. It's 15 minutes, and we try really hard to stick to that. And all we do is go around and say, what is going on in your world right now? We don't want to talk about consumer stuff. We don't want to talk about, you know, too much. But hey, I'm going on vacation this week, or I'm going to go to an April conference this week, or I'm getting ready to do this. And just to be able to share a little bit, everybody gets a couple of minutes to talk about it. And it's made a huge difference. Even though we have a shared calendar, which is another part of our more formal thing, is that you can, you know, people can go on and see where on my calendar what I'm doing, but being able to talk about it a little bit has made a huge difference in just improving organizational accountability and awareness, for lack of a better term. So,
Yeah, Scott, I think that that's really important too, because when kind of everyone knows what everyone is doing, like, for example, if someone's in the middle of completing reports, maybe the other staff member, if they're sending an email to that person, they might not be upset if they know that she or he is working on reports when she doesn't respond in a few hours. So I think it just creates a little bit of understanding.
My staff know that when I'm doing my end of the year report that M&M is going to be coming out of my office and the door is going to be shut, and it's best to leave Scott alone. So, yeah, absolutely.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, any other questions or comments or thoughts on this topic? Are we learning anything today? I feel like I'm just soaking in all your nuggets. You guys, I mean, I know that I recruited you, but I didn't realize how great this would be. I'm just really pleased with all of the really great ideas coming out. How about folks from the audience? Are there things from today that really resonated with you? Are folks out there? We are. Kay Williams says, this webinar has been very helpful. Thank you. Well, that's good to know. Good.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
We're still, you know, we still have just a few moments left. We have, you know, just one or two more slides, but definitely, you know, please keep chatting in or unmuting and saying your piece. We'd love to hear from you on your center. What makes you stay, or, you know, what kinds of issues maybe are you facing at your center? While folks are maybe jumping in, Scott or Brooke, would you want to maybe read the slide for us?
Is this mine, Brooke? I can't remember. I'll take
I
it.
think, I, yeah, we can go ahead. Yeah.
I'll do the first, you do the second, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
So from
Teamwork.
conversation to implementation. So if someone isn't right, it isn't my fault. That can be one of the hardest things to swallow, especially as a newer supervisor. And especially, and one of the good advice / bad advice I got when I first got my job as an executive director was, no matter what happens in the organization, it's always your fault. But in all reality, it's okay. And I talked about this earlier. This may not be the right thing for everybody, and to almost view it. And if I have an employee here who is unhappy, if I have an employee here who is struggling with their job, this might not be the right job for them. And perhaps I'm stealing from other employees. Perhaps I'm stealing from our grantors, our funders. If I continue to have them here, it is not my fault if an employee is not right. And to be okay with that, and to be like, I know I want you to be fearful of how much you love me, but sometimes if it isn't right, it's okay for somebody to leave the organization. So.
Yeah, and I think the point that I had is you don't have to do it all by yourself. You really want to utilize the skill set of your team and be open to feedback. So really, this is something that I learned along the way, because I'm very much someone who can just really focus in and feel like I have to do it all. And really, that's not what it's about. And that's why the hiring and the training and everything is so important, because you really want to have a team. You want to have that strong team, and you're not there to just do it all alone. I think for me, I'm a big basketball fan. So especially college basketball. I hate that March Madness is already over, but in March Madness, there's teams where they have an all-star player and they do really great, but it's really those teams that everyone, gets out and plays really hard, that really end up, making it to the Final Four and winning. So it really takes the whole team. So really utilize the skill set and the skills that everyone has.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say it's interesting. Go ahead, Mary.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, I was just asking you on the next slide.
I totally forgot what I was going to say there. Oh, yeah. And that's one of those things, too, I think, to the key of having employees appreciate how you appreciate their unique qualifications and expectations and skill set.
Right.
Is if you can adjust your workload around the strengths of your organization or of your employees, they begin to do things that are better. So if you have somebody that's super organized and you're in charge of this organized thing, if you have somebody that's a super good communicator and you give them opportunities to communicate, or somebody that's artistic. I have a staff member who's artistic and she is a program director. So program directors don't get to do very much art. So I am intentional from time to time with finding things where I'm like, I want you to do this for me. I want you to create this for me. And she appreciates that, because that's not in her job title, but it's something that it benefits the organization. It benefits her as a person. So if you can find opportunities to plug people into the right and successful situations, it makes a big difference. So.
Wonderful. And on that note, Stephen, at MSIL, we have a check-in by email from everyone within our organization to let one another know our goals for that particular day. Wow, that is such a great idea too. The thing about goal setting, they say, is if you put it out into the universe and tell other people, you're more likely to accomplish it. And so I love that idea of throwing out the goal for the day.
Love it.
And Brittany also mentioned that she just really liked that point about asking people why they stay instead of focusing on those people and why they leave. Yeah, wonderful. Wow, can you guys believe it? We powered through an hour and a half of material. I know that, you know, gosh, we didn't even know if we would have enough material to cover an hour, and look at that. Thank you everybody again for joining us today for this call. On this slide up here, we do have a link for the evaluation from today's discussion. If you could fill that out, it should pop up in your screen once I close the webinar as well. You know, it really does help us to track how we're doing and make sure that what we're doing is valuable for you all. We also will have the materials from today's call up at the April website on this link here. It's the April website underneath that IL Conversations tab. And if you have any colleagues in your state or your organization who weren't able to join us today, we will make this recording available as well so they can go through the whole webinar, which I just think is so valuable. I'm going to push it out on our listserv because I think the material you guys went through today, I think can really help all centers. And then Brooke and Scott, gosh, we just really, really appreciated you being our fearless leaders for today's call. And Brooke and Scott both graciously agreed to share their emails. And so if you have any follow-up questions, or you would like to hear more about a certain, you know, a certain idea that they brought up, feel free to email them. Or as always, you can reach back out to me and we'll get you connected. So that is our time for today. And if anybody has any thoughts or ideas from your center that you weren't able to share today, we would still really love to hear them. I'll let you know as I'm giving you all a little dizziness. My email is at the bottom of this slide here, mary.olson@mso.umt.edu. I'd love to hear your ideas from your center, and we can include those in the materials on the website. You know, a good friend of mine told me once that if you have seen one center, you have seen one center. Because Centers for Independent Living are so unique and we all do things in our own way based on our communities, we would just love to hear from each one of you and how you are retaining staff in your area. So thank you again, and we will see you in the webosphere for our next conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you.